Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is save someone's life. Ava Campbell learned that lesson at exactly 9:47 p.m. on a Saturday night at the Grand Josun Hotel in Seoul, when she deliberately spilled an entire glass of Château Margaux 2015, worth approximately $3,000, all over the white tuxedo of the most dangerous man in Korea. She'd been working as a server at elite events in Seoul for 8 months, supplementing her graduate student income by serving champagne and canapés to wealthy Koreans who barely noticed the help. It was good money for relatively easy work: stand, smile, serve drinks, collect tips, go home. The wealthy liked having diverse staff at their events because it made them feel cosmopolitan and progressive without requiring any actual engagement with different cultures. Ava was perfect for the role. She spoke Korean fluently after 2 years of intensive study, understood etiquette protocols for formal events, and had the kind of professional demeanor that made her invisible to guests who wanted service without interaction. Tonight's event was a charity gala benefiting children's education, attended by Seoul's political and business elite. Ava had been assigned to the VIP section, the area reserved for guests important enough to require dedicated service rather than just general circulation. She'd been serving champagne for 2 hours, moving through the crowd with practiced efficiency, when she noticed something unusual. One of the guests in the VIP section, a man maybe late 30s, wearing an impeccably tailored white tuxedo that probably cost more than Ava's annual tuition, was being watched with unusual intensity by several other guests. Not the normal social observation of the wealthy evaluating each other, but focused surveillance that suggested threat assessment. The man himself was striking, conventionally attractive in the way Korean men at these events usually were, but carrying himself with a level of controlled danger that separated him from the merely wealthy. He moved through social interactions with polite efficiency, clearly present at the gala because attendance was expected rather than because he enjoyed these events. Ava had learned to read people during her time serving at elite gatherings. This man was someone important and dangerous, someone other guests were intimidated by and careful around. She asked one of the other servers who he was. "That's Ju-won Min," the server whispered, looking nervous just saying the name. "He runs organized crime operations across Seoul. Very dangerous. Very powerful. Don't make any mistakes serving him, people who offend him tend to disappear." Ava filed that information away. She'd served plenty of dangerous people in 8 months of this work. You treated them with professional courtesy, didn't make eye contact unless they initiated it, and absolutely never made mistakes that would draw their attention. At 9:45 p.m., Ava was circulating with a tray of wine when she noticed something that made her training as a chemistry graduate student immediately alarm. Ju-won Min's wine glass, a Bordeaux that had been poured from a specific bottle brought by one of the event organizers, was fizzing slightly. Not bubbling the way champagne bubbled, but showing small reactions at the surface that suggested chemical interaction inconsistent with normal wine. Ava moved closer, trying to get a better view without being obvious. The fizzing was subtle, something most people wouldn't notice in the dim lighting of the gala. But Ava had spent 2 years studying chemical reactions in laboratory settings. She knew what chemical interaction looked like. Someone had put something in Ju-won Min's wine. Something that was reacting with the alcohol in ways that suggested poison or toxin. Ava had approximately 30 seconds to make a decision before Ju-won would drink from that glass and ingest whatever had been added to it. Option 1, do nothing. Let the dangerous crime boss drink poisoned wine, deal with whatever happened afterward, stay invisible and uninvolved like the professional server she was supposed to be. Option 2, intervene. Stop him from drinking the poisoned wine somehow, probably drawing massive attention to herself in the process, definitely violating every protocol about servers not interfering with guests. Ava made her decision based on a simple moral calculation. She couldn't watch someone be poisoned and do nothing, regardless of who they were or what they'd done in their life. She moved quickly, approaching Ju-won from the side where his attention was focused on the conversation he was having with a business associate. She positioned herself with the tray at an angle that would allow her to accidentally spill if she stumbled. Then she deliberately caught her heel on the carpet, lurched forward with theatrical clumsiness, and dumped the entire tray of wine directly onto Ju Min's pristine white tuxedo. Red wine cascaded down his jacket, soaked into his shirt, ruined the expensive fabric completely. The reaction was immediate. Everyone within 10 feet gasped. The conversation stopped. All attention turned to Ava and the catastrophic spill she'd just committed. Ju looked down at his ruined tuxedo, then up at Ava. His expression was carefully neutral, but there was something dangerous in his eyes: assessment, evaluation, the look of someone deciding how to respond to offense. "I am so sorry," Ava said immediately in Korean, bowing deeply in apology. "I tripped. I'm incredibly clumsy. Please let me help clean that up." Ju-won's hand shot out, gripping her wrist before she could move to blot the wine. His grip was firm, not painful but absolutely controlling. "Look at me," he said quietly. Ava looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. He studied her face carefully, and she saw his expression shift from annoyance to something else. Recognition, understanding, maybe even gratitude. His eyes moved from her face to the table beside them, where his wine glass still sat fizzing subtly with the chemical reaction Ava had noticed. "You did that to save me from the poison, didn't you?" he said, his voice quiet enough that only Ava could hear. She didn't confirm or deny, just held his gaze while her heart pounded. Ju-won released her wrist, looked at the horrified event coordinator who'd rushed over to address the catastrophic serving failure, and said calmly, "It was an accident. No harm done. Please have someone bring this server a fresh tray and ensure she's not penalized for an unfortunate stumble." "Mr. Min, I am deeply sorry for this unprofessional behavior," the coordinator started. "I said it was an accident and no harm was done. The matter is resolved. Please attend to the other guests." The coordinator retreated, clearly confused by Ju-won's merciful response to being drenched in expensive wine by incompetent help. Ju-won looked at Ava again. "You saw the chemical reaction. I saw unusual fizzing that suggested something had been added to your wine that was reacting with the alcohol. I don't know what specific toxin was used, but the reaction pattern was clearly inconsistent with normal wine behavior. And you decided to ruin my tuxedo and risk your employment to prevent me from drinking it. I couldn't watch someone be poisoned and do nothing. Regardless of who they were." "Regardless of who they were," Ju-won repeated thoughtfully. "Do you know who I am? The other servers told me you're Ju Min. That you run organized crime operations in Seoul. That you're very dangerous and I should avoid making mistakes around you. And yet you deliberately spilled wine on me to save my life. That's either very brave or very foolish. Probably both." Ju-won almost smiled. "Wait here. Don't leave. I need to address the poisoning attempt before whoever tried to kill me realizes their plan failed." He walked away, making a subtle gesture to several men positioned around the Gala who were clearly his security. They moved immediately, efficiently, beginning to identify and isolate potential threats in ways that most guests wouldn't notice but that Ava recognized as professional security work. Ava stood there holding her now empty tray, processing what had just happened. She'd saved a crime boss's life. He'd recognized what she'd done and was apparently grateful rather than angry. And now she was standing in the middle of an elite Seoul gala while security personnel investigated a poisoning attempt that she'd prevented by committing what should have been a career-ending serving failure. This was not how she'd expected her evening to go when she'd shown up for her shift 3 hours ago. 10 minutes later, Ju-won returned. His tuxedo was still ruined but he'd removed the wet jacket and was just wearing the wine-stained shirt with surprising confidence. "Walk with me," he said to Ava. "We need to talk somewhere private. I'm working. I can't just leave my assigned section. I've spoken with your employer. You're released from service for the evening with full compensation. Come with me." It wasn't really a request. Ava followed him through the gala to a private room off the main ballroom. The kind of space hotels kept for VIP guests who needed privacy during events. Once inside with the door closed, Ju-won turned to face her directly. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Every detail about the wine glass and the reaction you observed. Ava described the fizzing, the timing, the specific visual characteristics that had made her recognize something was wrong. Her chemistry training made the explanation technical, precise, using terminology that probably meant nothing to most people but that clearly meant something to Josun. Could you identify the specific toxin if you tested the wine? He asked. Probably. I'd need access to a chemistry lab with the right equipment, but I could run tests to identify what was added based on the reaction patterns and chemical composition. I have access to a private lab. Would you be willing to test the wine and tell me what poison was used? That would be highly unusual for a server to be asked to do. You're not just a server. You're a chemistry graduate student who recognized poisoning through observation. I need that expertise to understand who tried to kill me and how they attempted it. Why would I agree to help you investigate a poisoning attempt on a crime boss? That seems like a good way to get dragged into dangerous situations I want no part of. Because you already saved my life tonight, which means you're already involved whether you want to be or not. The people who tried to poison me will eventually realize their attempt failed. They'll investigate how it failed. They'll review security footage and witness statements. They'll identify you as the server who spilled wine on me at the exact moment I was about to drink from the poisoned glass. They'll conclude you interfered with their assassination attempt. That makes you a target. Ava felt cold recognition. He was right. She'd thought she was just saving someone from being poisoned, but she'd actually interfered with a professional hit on a crime boss. The people behind that hit would want to know how their plan failed and would eliminate anyone who'd interfered. So my options are help you investigate or become a target for assassination? Your options are help me investigate while under my protection, or refuse and try to protect yourself from professional killers who have resources and connections I guarantee you can't defend against alone. That's coercion. That's accurate threat assessment. I'm not threatening you, I'm offering protection from people who will absolutely try to kill you for interfering with their operation. Ava processed that. If I help you, what exactly does that involve? Test the wine to identify the poison. Tell me anything you can determine about its origin or characteristics that might help identify who used it. Stay under my protection until the threat is neutralized. After that, you're free to return to your normal life. And if I refuse? Then I'll still try to protect you because you saved my life and I don't let debts like that go unpaid. But you'll make it substantially more difficult and substantially more dangerous if you're not cooperating with security measures. Ava made her decision based on the same pragmatic survival instinct that had made her spill the wine in the first place. Better to accept protection and involvement than to pretend she could avoid consequences of actions she'd already taken. Fine. I'll help you investigate. But I have conditions. Name them. I continue my graduate studies. I'm not abandoning 2 years of research because of this situation. I attend my classes and my lab sessions regardless of security concerns. Acceptable with security escort. Next condition? When this is over, when you've identified who tried to poison you and neutralized the threat, I go back to my normal life. No ongoing involvement with your organization, no pressure to continue working for you, no attempts to recruit me into criminal operations. Agreed. You helped me because you couldn't watch someone be poisoned, not because you want involvement with organized crime. I respect that. Anything else? Don't lie to me. If I'm helping you investigate, I need honest information about the threats and the situation. I can't make good decisions with incomplete or false information. I'll be as honest as security allows. Some things I can't tell you because knowing them would make you a target for additional threats. But I won't deliberately mislead you about dangers you're facing. That's acceptable. Josun extended his hand. Then we have an agreement. You help me investigate who tried to poison me tonight. I protect you from the consequences of saving my life. When it's over, you return to your studies and we go our separate ways. Ava shook his hand, sealing an agreement that would transform her life in ways she couldn't possibly anticipate. Subscribe to see what happens when a chemistry student accidentally becomes the only person who can identify assassins targeting Korea's most dangerous crime boss, and saving someone's life makes you the next target. Comment where you're watching from, and tell me, would you spill wine on someone to save them from poison? This story is just beginning. The private laboratory Josun had access to was located in a pharmaceutical research facility his organization owned. One of the legitimate business operations that funded his criminal activities and provided useful resources for situations like this. Ava arrived with Josun at 11 p.m., accompanied by his security team who'd collected the poisoned wine glass from the Gala before anyone else could tamper with it. The lab was state-of-the-art, equipped with analytical instruments Ava only had limited access to at her university. She immediately began testing the wine, using gas chromatography and mass spectrometry to identify the chemical composition of whatever had been added. Josun watched her work with focused attention, not interfering but clearly interested in her process. "You're very competent," he observed after she'd been working for 30 minutes. "I'm a second-year chemistry doctoral candidate. Analytical chemistry is literally my specialty. This is less complicated than my actual research on catalytic reaction mechanisms." "What made you choose chemistry?" "I like understanding how things work at molecular level. Chemical reactions follow predictable rules. You can understand and control them if you know the principles. It's more orderly than most aspects of life." "That's a very rational approach. What made you choose organized crime?" Ava asked, not looking up from the spectrometer readings she was analyzing. "I inherited it. My father ran operations in Seoul. When he died, I took over. It wasn't really a choice so much as an obligation. You could have walked away. Chosen something else. Walking away would have meant abandoning hundreds of people whose livelihoods depend on the operations I manage. It would have created succession conflicts that would have been violent and destructive. Taking over was the responsible choice even if it wasn't what I'd have chosen for myself." That's surprisingly ethical reasoning for someone running criminal operations. "I try to be ethical within fundamentally unethical context. It doesn't make what I do morally acceptable, but at least I'm trying to minimize harm while operating in profession built on causing it." Ava looked up from her analysis. "That's more self-awareness than I expected. I'm not a monster. I'm someone trying to be decent within terrible circumstances. There's a difference." After 2 hours of testing, Ava had her results. It's Aconitine. Extracted from monkshood plant, Aconitine species. Extremely toxic, acts on cardiac and nervous systems, causes arrhythmia and paralysis. Lethal dose for an adult is approximately 2 to 4 milligrams. Based on concentration in your wine glass, you had approximately 6 milligrams, well above lethal threshold. You'd have been dead within 30 minutes of ingestion, probably faster given the concentration. Can you determine anything about where it came from or who might have used it? Aconitine isn't commonly available. It requires specific knowledge to extract from monkshood plants without poisoning yourself in the process. The extraction process leaves chemical signatures that can sometimes identify methodology. Give me a few more hours and I can tell you whether this was professionally extracted or amateur work. Take the time you need. I'll have food brought in. You've been working for hours without eating." While Ava continued her analysis, Josun made phone calls in Korean, clearly discussing the poisoning attempt with his security team and other members of his organization. Even though Ava spoke Korean fluently, he was using terminology and references she didn't fully understand, suggesting he was being careful about what information he shared in her presence. Around 2 a.m., Ava completed her analysis. The extraction was professional. Whoever prepared this Aconitine knew exactly what they were doing. The chemical signatures suggest industrial-level processing rather than amateur plant extraction. This came from someone with access to either pharmaceutical facilities or specialized knowledge about alkaloid extraction. That narrows it down significantly. Only a few organizations in Seoul have that capability. There's something else. The delivery method was sophisticated. They didn't just dump poison in your glass, they used a time-release capsule that would dissolve slowly in alcohol, creating the fizzing I noticed as it broke down and released the Aconitine. That's why you didn't taste anything wrong immediately. The poison was designed to release gradually so you wouldn't notice until you'd ingested a lethal dose. How long between when it was added to my glass and when it would have started releasing? Based on the capsule degradation patterns I'm seeing, approximately 10 minutes. Someone added this to your wine about 10 minutes before I spilled it. Which means someone at the gala had access to my glass within that timeframe. That's valuable information for identifying suspects. Josun made more phone calls, relaying what Ava had discovered to his security team. When he ended the calls, he looked at Ava with expression she couldn't quite read. You've given me more useful information in 4 hours than my entire security team has gathered in their investigation. You're exceptionally good at this. I'm good at analytical chemistry. This is just applying those skills to poisoning investigation instead of academic research. Would you consider doing this professionally? Working as a consultant for my organization when situations require chemical analysis? Absolutely not. I'm helping you investigate this specific poisoning because I'm already involved and you've convinced me I'm a target. But I'm not becoming a criminal consultant. I'm going back to my PhD research when this is over. That's a shame. You're wasted just studying catalytic reaction mechanisms. My research has practical applications for green chemistry and sustainable industrial processes. That's not a waste. Fair point. But the offer stands if you change your mind. Over the next week, Ava continued attending her graduate classes and laboratory sessions while under constant security protection from Josun's organization. It was surreal. She'd arrive at Seoul National University accompanied by armed guards who positioned themselves discreetly around her classroom building. She'd work in her research lab with security personnel stationed outside. She'd return to a safe house Josun had moved her to after determining her original apartment was too vulnerable to surveillance. Her advisor Professor Kim noticed the security presence. Ava, is everything all right? You've had men following you all week. I witnessed something I shouldn't have. These are protective measures until the situation is resolved. I'm safe, just being cautious. If you need to take time off from your studies. No. My research is important to me. I'm not letting this situation disrupt my academic work. Professor Kim accepted that, though he was clearly concerned about whatever had resulted in a graduate student requiring armed security. Meanwhile, Josun's investigation into the poisoning attempt had identified 3 primary suspects, rival organizations that had the capability and motivation to attempt assassination. We've narrowed it to these 3 groups, Josun explained during one of their meetings at the safe house. The Park family from Incheon, who've been trying to expand into Seoul territory. The Choi organization from Busan, who have pharmaceutical connections that would give them access to professional Aconitine extraction. And a newer group called the Tigers, who've been aggressively challenging established operations. How do you determine which one actually attempted the poisoning? By analyzing their specific capabilities and methodologies. Which is why I need your help again. Each of these organizations has attempted poisonings before. I have samples from previous attempts that were unsuccessful. If you could analyze those and compare them to the Aconitine methodology used against me, you might be able to identify matching patterns that would tell us which group was responsible. You have samples from previous poisoning attempts? That's disturbingly organized record keeping. Knowing how your enemies try to kill you is valuable information. We keep evidence from all assassination attempts for exactly this kind of analysis. Ava spent 3 days analyzing the historical poisoning samples, comparing extraction methodologies and delivery mechanisms to the Aconitine attack against Josun. Her conclusion was definitive: the Tigers. The chemical signatures match perfectly, same extraction methodology, same time-release capsule design, even similar concentration levels. Whoever attempted to poison you has done this before, probably multiple times, using the exact same supplier and methodology. You're certain? I'm 95% certain based on chemical analysis. The methodology signatures are too specific to be coincidental. The tigers used this exact approach in at least 3 previous attempts based on the samples you provided. That's enough certainty for me to act on. Thank you, Ava. You've been incredibly helpful. What happens now? Now I address the tigers' attempt to kill me in ways that ensure they don't try again and that send clear messages to other organizations about the consequences of assassination attempts. You're going to retaliate violently. I'm going to respond in ways that protect my organization and deter future threats. Whether that's violent or diplomatic depends on how the tigers respond to my initial approach. I don't want details about the retaliation. Just tell me when it's safe for me to return to my normal life. It'll be safe once I've neutralized the tigers as a threat and confirmed there are no additional assassination attempts planned by other organizations. Approximately 2 more weeks based on current intelligence. 2 weeks. Then I go back to my research and you go back to running criminal operations and we never interact again. That was our agreement. Except life rarely follows agreements perfectly, and both Ava and Josun were about to discover that the connection between them was more complicated than a simple investigation partnership. The complication started during week 2 of Ava's protective custody, when she realized she was developing feelings for Josun that went well beyond professional appreciation for him keeping her safe. He visited the safe house every evening to update her on the investigation and to check on her well-being. Those visits had evolved from strictly business discussions into actual conversations about their lives, their backgrounds, their perspectives on complicated moral questions. Why chemistry? Josun asked one evening. They were sitting in the safe house living room, reviewing updates on the tigers' investigation. My mother died from cancer when I was 16. The chemotherapy that was supposed to save her was almost as destructive as the disease. I wanted to understand how chemical treatments worked, how they could be improved, how research might develop less harmful therapies. Chemistry became my way of fighting back against the thing that killed her. I'm sorry about your mother. It shaped my career. Made me focus on research that has practical medical applications instead of just theoretical understanding. If my work can contribute to better cancer treatments eventually, that gives her death meaning beyond just loss. That's admirable motivation. What about you? If you hadn't inherited your father's organization, what would you have chosen? Architecture. I was fascinated by buildings and urban design, how cities could be structured to serve people better. I was accepted to architectural programs at several universities. Then my father died and I inherited responsibility for hundreds of people whose livelihoods depended on operations I had to learn to manage. Do you resent it? Being forced into profession you didn't choose? Sometimes. But I've tried to make it less terrible, reducing violence where possible, building legitimate businesses to transition away from purely criminal operations, treating people fairly even when I have power to exploit them. It's still organized crime and it still causes harm. But at least I'm trying to cause less harm than my predecessors did. These conversations revealed depths to Josun that Ava hadn't expected. He was thoughtful, genuinely struggling with the moral implications of his profession, actively trying to be ethical within fundamentally unethical context. And she found herself attracted to that complexity, the man who ran criminal operations but genuinely cared about minimizing harm, who was dangerous but also surprisingly kind, who could order retaliations against enemies while also spending his evenings having philosophical discussions with a graduate student he was protecting. The attraction was completely inappropriate. Josun was a crime boss, someone whose profession was built on violence and illegality. Ava was an academic focused on research and sustainable chemistry. They existed in completely different moral universes. But attraction doesn't care about appropriateness or moral compatibility. Ava realized she was falling for him during one of his evening visits when he brought her favorite food. Ethiopian cuisine he'd had specially delivered because she'd mentioned once that she missed the restaurants from her hometown in D.C. You remembered I like Ethiopian food. You mentioned it while discussing how Seoul's international food scene compares to major American cities. I thought you might appreciate something familiar while you're stuck in protective custody. It was a small gesture, but it revealed he'd been paying attention to casual comments, that he cared about her comfort beyond just fulfilling protective obligations. Thank you. That's thoughtful. You saved my life. Bringing you dinner you'll enjoy is minimal reciprocation. They ate together, talking about everything except the assassination investigation. Her research on catalytic mechanisms, his interest in Seoul's urban development, their shared appreciation for classical music despite coming from completely different backgrounds. When Ju-won left that evening, Ava sat in the safe house processing the uncomfortable truth that she'd developed genuine feelings for someone she should absolutely not be attracted to. The Tigers situation resolved 12 days after Ava's initial analysis identified them as the poisoning culprits. Ju-won arrived at the safe house looking satisfied in ways that suggested his retaliation had been successful. The Tigers are no longer a threat. Their leadership has been neutralized, their organization has been absorbed by allied groups, and word has spread through Seoul's criminal networks about the consequences of attempting assassination. You're safe now. You can return to your normal life. Ava should have been relieved. Instead, she felt complicated emotions about their agreement ending and her returning to life that didn't include evening conversations with a crime boss who brought her Ethiopian food and discussed architecture. That's good news. When can I move back to my apartment? Tomorrow if you'd like. My security team will sweep your apartment to ensure it's safe, then you can return whenever you're ready. And the security detail? Will be removed once we've confirmed there are no residual threats from the Tigers or other organizations. You'll go back to being just a graduate student that nobody's paying attention to. That's what I wanted. Return to normal life. But, Ju-won said, clearly reading hesitation in her voice. But I'm going to miss our conversations. These past 2 weeks have been strange. I've been under protective custody because I saved your life from poisoning, but I've also gotten to know you in ways I wouldn't have otherwise. You're more complicated than I expected someone in your profession to be. You're more interesting than most people I encounter in my work. Graduate students studying catalytic chemistry aren't usually part of my social circle. So what happens now? We just go back to our separate lives and never interact again? That was our agreement. You help me investigate, I protect you from consequences, when it's over you return to your studies and we go our separate ways. What if I don't want to go completely separate ways? Ju-won looked at her carefully. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe we could occasionally see each other. Not in a professional context, not because of security concerns, just because we've discovered we enjoy talking to each other and that seems worth maintaining. You want to date a crime boss while pursuing your PhD in chemistry? I want to occasionally have dinner with someone I've come to care about despite all the very rational reasons I shouldn't. That's not quite the same thing as dating a crime boss. Ava, I appreciate that we've developed connection during this situation. But you need to think carefully about whether maintaining any relationship with someone in my profession is compatible with the life you're building. I'm not going to transition to legitimate operations anytime soon. I'm involved in activities that are violent and illegal. Being associated with me creates risks and moral complications you shouldn't have to navigate. I understand that. But I'm an adult who can make her own choices about acceptable complications. And I'm choosing to at least explore whether we could maintain some kind of relationship despite the obvious incompatibilities. Why? You could walk away now, return to your academic life, forget you ever got involved with organized crime. That's the safe choice. Because you're the most interesting person I've met in 2 years of living in Seoul. Because our conversations have been intellectually stimulating in ways my academic discussions rarely are. Because you brought me Ethiopian food and discussed Rachmaninoff piano concertos and actually listened when I explained catalytic reaction mechanisms even though you had no practical reason to care. That's worth exploring despite the complications. Ju-won was quiet for a long moment. If we do this, if we try to maintain some kind of relationship, I need you to understand something. My profession creates constant threats. Being associated with me makes you a potential target for people who want to hurt me or gain leverage. I can provide security, but I can't eliminate the risk completely. You'd be choosing to accept ongoing danger. I accept that. I'm not naive about what being associated with you involves. And I can't be involved in your academic life. I can't attend your research presentations or meet your professors or interact with Seoul National University in any official capacity. My presence would create questions and complications you don't need. I understand. We'd have to keep things very separate. Your world and my academic world don't overlap. Those are significant constraints for a relationship. They are. But I still want to try. Unless you don't want to maintain contact after I return to my normal life? I want to maintain contact. I've enjoyed our conversations too. I just want you to make this decision with full understanding of what you're accepting. I'm making an informed choice. So let's try this. Carefully, with clear boundaries, with the understanding that it might not work given the incompatibilities. But let's at least try. They started dating, though calling it dating felt inadequate for describing the complicated relationship between a crime boss and a chemistry PhD student who'd met when she spilled wine on him to prevent his assassination. Ava returned to her apartment and her normal academic routine. Josun continued running his criminal operations. They'd meet for dinner once or twice a week at discreet restaurants where Josun was known and where security could be maintained without being intrusive. It was strange, exciting, morally complicated in ways Ava had never experienced before. Her friends at the university noticed changes. You seem happier lately, her lab mate Sarah observed. Are you seeing someone? I'm seeing someone. It's complicated and I can't share details, but yes, I'm dating someone. Mysterious. I approve of mysterious romance. The relationship developed slowly, carefully, with both of them navigating the significant incompatibilities between their worlds. Josun never told Ava details about his criminal operations. She never asked. He existed in her life as the man she had dinner with, who discussed architecture and classical music, who was thoughtful and surprisingly kind despite his dangerous profession. She existed in his life as the graduate student who'd saved his life and who provided intellectual stimulation his normal business relationships didn't offer. 6 months into their complicated relationship, Josun asked Ava a question she'd been anticipating. If I transitioned to legitimate operations? If I spent the next few years extracting myself from criminal activities and building purely legal businesses, would you consider something more serious? Long-term partnership instead of just careful dating with clear boundaries? Are you actually considering transition? Or is this hypothetical? I'm seriously considering it. I've been building legitimate businesses for years as eventual exit strategy. Your presence in my life has accelerated my timeline for that transition because I want to be someone you don't have moral reservations about being with. I want you to transition because you want to leave criminal operations, not because you think it's necessary to keep me. Both can be true. I've wanted to transition for years but stayed because walking away seemed too complicated. You've given me motivation to actually do the complicated work of extraction instead of just planning for it indefinitely. How long would transition take? 3 to 5 years to do it properly. Transferring operations to trusted successors, building legitimate businesses to replace criminal income, extracting myself from obligations without creating violent succession conflicts. It's complex. If you're genuinely committed to transition, not just performing commitment to keep our relationship, then yes, I'd consider something more serious. But I need the transition to be real, not just surface-level legitimacy while maintaining criminal operations secretly. It would be real. Complete extraction from organized crime, full transition to legitimate operations. I'm tired of profession built on violence and illegality. I want to build something sustainable that doesn't require constantly managing threats and retaliations. Then I'll support that transition. We can build something serious while you're extracting yourself from criminal operations. The transition took 4 years, longer than Josun had initially estimated but faster than most people managed to extract themselves from organized crime leadership. Ava completed her PhD during that time, defending her dissertation on catalytic mechanisms for sustainable industrial chemistry. She was offered a postdoctoral position at Seoul National University that would eventually lead to a faculty position. Josun systematically transferred his criminal operations to successors, built legitimate businesses in real estate development and pharmaceutical research, extracted himself from the violent aspects of organized crime. It wasn't clean or simple. There were conflicts with rivals who saw his transition as weakness, threats from people who didn't want him to leave, complications that required careful navigation. But he did it. For years after his conversation with Ava about transition, Josun was completely legitimate, running successful businesses that were legal, profitable, and didn't require violence or constant threat management. "I'm out," he told Ava the day his lawyers confirmed the final transfers were complete. Completely extracted from organized crime. Just a businessman running legitimate operations now. How does it feel? Strange. I've been in criminal operations since I was 23. Walking away from 15 years of that life is disorienting. But it also feels right. Like I'm finally building something sustainable instead of just managing inherited obligations. I'm proud of you. That transition took genuine courage and massive effort. I did it because I wanted to be someone you could be with without moral compromise. That was worth 4 years of complicated extraction work. 8 months after Josun completed his transition, he proposed. They were at the restaurant where they'd had their first official date, the same discreet place where he'd been known during his criminal years but that had become just a favorite restaurant during his legitimate business phase. "Marry me," he said directly, pulling out a ring. "I love you. I want to build a life together that's based on who we actually are instead of on the complicated circumstances that brought us together. I'm not a crime boss anymore. I'm just someone who loves you and wants to spend his life with you." Yes. Absolutely yes. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that combined Korean and American traditions, attended by Ava's academic colleagues who thought they were witnessing a normal wedding between a researcher and a businessman, unaware of the poisoning and assassination attempt that had brought them together. 5 years after Ava had spilled wine on the most dangerous man in Korea to save him from poisoning, she'd built a life with someone who'd transformed himself from crime boss to legitimate businessman because she'd given him motivation to become someone worth building a future with. "Do you ever regret it?" Josun asked on their 5th anniversary. "Spilling that wine? Getting involved with organized crime assassination investigation? All the complications that came from saving my life? Never. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though it started with me ruining your $3,000 tuxedo with Château Margaux. Best investment in wine I ever made. Though technically you were the one who spilled it. To save your life. Don't forget that part. I never forget. You saved me twice, once from the poison, and once from a life I was trapped in because I thought extraction was too complicated to be worth attempting. You made it worth the complications." They'd proven that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is save someone's life, because it creates connections that transform both people in ways they never anticipated. That moral choices in the moment can lead to complicated relationships that require both people to change fundamentally to make them work. That the person you save from poisoning might become the person you can't imagine living without. If you're both willing to do the work of transforming yourselves into people who can actually build sustainable partnership. The graduate student who spilled wine to prevent assassination. The crime boss who transitioned to legitimate business to be worthy of her. Both of them building a life from the foundation of one moral choice and the willingness to transform themselves to make that choice lead somewhere meaningful. Moral choices have consequences we can't predict when we make them. Ava Campbell spilled wine on a dangerous man to prevent him from drinking poison. It was a split-second decision based on simple principle, She couldn't watch someone be murdered and do nothing, regardless of who they were. That choice saved Ju Won-min's life. But it also pulled her into his dangerous world, made her a target for the people who'd attempted the assassination, forced her into protective custody and investigation work she'd never anticipated. Most people would have regretted that choice. Ava transformed it into opportunity. She used her chemistry expertise to identify the assassins. She developed a relationship with the man she'd saved. She gave him motivation to leave organized crime and build legitimate life. That transformation wasn't easy or simple. It required Ju Won to spend 4 years extracting himself from criminal operations, transferring power, building new businesses, fundamentally changing who he was professionally. It required Ava to accept the moral complications of being involved with someone whose profession was built on violence, to maintain careful boundaries between her academic life and his criminal world, to trust that his transition commitment was genuine rather than just performance. Both of them had to change to make the relationship work. Both of them had to be willing to do difficult work of transformation rather than just accepting their circumstances. Their story proves that moral choices create ripple effects we can't control. Saving someone's life doesn't just preserve that life, it creates obligation, connection, potential for relationships that transform both people. It also proves that people can change fundamentally if given sufficient motivation. Ju Won ran criminal operations for 15 years. He could have stayed in that profession indefinitely. But Ava's presence in his life gave him reason to extract himself, to become someone whose profession matched his actual values rather than just his inherited obligations. Not everyone would make that transformation. Many people stay in terrible circumstances because change is too difficult. But Ju Won did the work because he wanted to be worthy of the woman who'd saved his life by spilling wine on him. That's the lesson. Moral choices matter not just for their immediate impact but for the relationships and transformations they make possible. Saving someone's life creates connection that can lead anywhere if both people are willing to do the work of becoming people who can build something sustainable together. The graduate student who recognized poison and chose intervention over safety. The crime boss who chose transformation over comfortable inherited power. Both of them proving that the person you save might become the person you build your life with, if you're both willing to transform yourselves into people worthy of that life. If you love this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about moral choices with unexpected consequences, transformations that require genuine work, and relationships built from the foundation of one person saving another's life in spectacular fashion. Comment below. Would you ruin expensive wine to save a dangerous stranger from poisoning? Or would self-preservation override moral obligation to intervene? Share your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and remember, the moral choices you make in moments of crisis create ripple effects you can't predict. Choose based on who you want to be, not on what's convenient or safe. The person you save might transform your entire life. Until next time.